lonely rancher found a child beside a frozen wagon. "I'll be your father," he said. Henry McAllister woke before sunrise, as he did every morning. The sky was still dark, a deep blue fading into gray, and a bitter wind swept across his ranch in northern Montana. The snow had fallen heavily overnight, covering everything in a thick white blanket. Henry pulled his coat tighter around him and stepped outside, the crunch of snow under his boots breaking the silence of the morning. For years he had lived alone in this remote place, surrounded only by the endless fields and the occasional sound of cattle moving in the distance. Life was quiet, sometimes painfully so, but he had grown used to the solitude. The ranch had been in his family for generations. His father had built the barn, and his grandfather had planted the windbreaks of tall pines that still lined the edges of the property. But after the deaths of his parents and his younger sister moving to the city, Henry had stayed behind. He found comfort in the routines, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and tending to the land. Yet, even with the work that kept him busy, there was a loneliness he could not shake. It was a quiet ache, one he tried to ignore, buried under the layers of wool sweaters and cold mornings. On this particular morning, the snow had drifted into tall mounds along the fence lines. Henry adjusted his hat and braced himself against the wind as he began his rounds. The cold stung his face and made his eyes water, but he moved steadily. He knew every corner of this land, every tree and rock and patch of frozen earth. He had walked these trails countless times, even in the worst storms. As he approached the northern edge of the property, he noticed something unusual. A small wooden wagon, partially buried in snow, sat crookedly along the path. At first, he thought it might have been left by a neighbor, but as he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, curled beside the wagon, was a small child. The girl was shivering violently, her clothes thin and soaked through from the snow, her tiny face pale and red from the cold. She was so small and fragile, and she looked lost, almost like a small animal trapped in the storm. Henry dropped his tools and ran toward her, calling her name, though he didn't know it yet. "Hey! Are you all right?" he shouted over the wind. The girl didn't respond. She just hugged her knees and shook, teeth chattering. Henry's chest tightened. He had never seen anyone so small and alone in such dangerous conditions. Without thinking, he knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, little one, we need to get you out of this cold," he said gently. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, filled with fear and confusion. There was something in her gaze that made Henry's heart ache. He slowly scooped her into his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. Her body was stiff, almost numb from the freezing weather. He could feel her small hands clutching at his coat, as if she had finally found a safe place to hold on to. Henry moved quickly back toward the house, every step through the snow a challenge. The cold bit through his gloves and soaked his boots, but he ignored it. All that mattered was keeping the girl safe and warm. He whispered softly to her, hoping his voice would calm her. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm here." She didn't say anything, but she didn't resist either. She seemed to trust him instinctively, as if she knew he would protect her. When they reached the cabin, Henry pushed open the door and carried her inside. The warmth hit them immediately, and the girl gasped, her small body relaxing slightly. Henry set her down on a thick rug in front of the fire and knelt beside her. He took off her wet gloves and hat, wrapping her in a warm blanket. She leaned into the fabric, shivering but slowly beginning to calm. Henry could see frost on the tips of her hair and her eyelashes, and he gently brushed it away. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. The girl shook her head, hugging the blanket tighter. Henry sighed, understanding that she might not be able to speak yet. or perhaps she was too frightened. He decided not to push her. For now, all that mattered was getting her warm and fed. He went to the kitchen and made a pot of hot soup, the aroma filling the cabin. When he returned, he offered it to her carefully. "Here, eat slowly. It will warm you up." The girl took the bowl with small, tentative hands and began to sip. Each spoonful made her a little more comfortable, her small body relaxing further. Henry watched her eat, feeling a strange mix of relief and a protective kind of love he had never known before. As the snowstorm continued outside, Henry kept her close. He wrapped another blanket around both of them and sat by the fire, telling her stories about the ranch, the animals, and the land. He spoke softly, not expecting a reply, just hoping the sound of his voice would make her feel safe. Hours passed like this, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Slowly she began to relax, even managing a small smile when he made a funny face. Henry realized something in that moment. His life, which had always been quiet and solitary, had suddenly changed. This little girl, so lost and vulnerable, had become the center of his world. He could feel a connection forming, a bond that was immediate and powerful. Without thinking twice, he made a promise to himself and to her. He would protect her, care for her, and be the father she had never had. I'll be your father," he whispered gently, more to himself than to her. The girl looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, and Henry felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the warmth of hope, of connection, and of the beginning of something new. A family created out of necessity, courage, and heart. That night, Henry stayed awake, watching over her as she slept, listening to the storm rage outside. The loneliness that had haunted him for so many years was gone, replaced by a responsibility and love that he had never expected. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of possibility. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that together they could face them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ranch in a soft white silence. Inside, a lonely man and a lost child had found each other, two lives intertwined by fate and by the cold, harsh realities of the world outside. And as the night wore on, Henry whispered again, as if promising it to the wind itself, "I'll keep you safe. I'll be your father." For the first time in years, Henry felt a quiet peace. The storm outside could rage all it wanted. Inside there was warmth, love, and the beginning of a bond that would change both of their lives forever. The morning light seeped through the frost-covered windows, casting a pale glow across Henry McAllister's cabin. He woke to the quiet sound of the little girl moving in her sleep. She had curled herself tightly under the blankets, still shivering slightly from the night's cold, but there was a sense of calm about her now. Henry watched her for a long moment, feeling an unusual tenderness. He had never had anyone depend on him before, and suddenly, here she was, small and vulnerable, needing him entirely. He got up quietly, careful not to wake her fully, and went to the kitchen. The wind still howled outside, rattling the windows and sending small drifts of snow across the porch. Henry brewed a pot of tea and boiled some water for oatmeal. Cooking for one was routine, easy, predictable, but cooking for a child was new. He remembered his sister teaching him about children long ago, but those lessons felt like distant memories. He decided to focus on warmth and nourishment, imagining that if she could eat well and stay warm, maybe she would begin to trust him even more. When he returned to the room, the girl had woken. Her eyes were large and dark, a mixture of sleepiness, curiosity, and a shadow of fear. She blinked at the fire and then at him, unsure of whether to speak or stay silent. Henry knelt beside her bed, smiling softly. "Good morning," he said gently. "I made some breakfast for you. It's warm and tasty." She hesitated, her small hands clutching the blanket. Henry didn't rush her. Instead, he sat beside her quietly, waiting. After a few moments, she whispered, almost shyly, "I, hungry." Henry nodded. "Of course. Come, sit with me." She moved slowly, still cautious, and Henry helped her onto a chair beside the table. He spooned oatmeal onto a small plate and handed it to her. The first bite was slow, tentative, but soon she began to eat more steadily. Henry watched, heart swelling with a strange new feeling. Care. He had always been a rancher, focused on work and survival, but now he felt something deeper. Responsibility, warmth. After breakfast, Henry suggested they get dressed for the day. The child had only thin clothes, and the wind outside was unforgiving. He dug through his cabin closet and found a small set of warm clothing left from a neighbor who had visited last winter. It was slightly big, but it would do. He helped her put on a thick wool sweater, warm pants, and sturdy boots. She still hesitated when he helped her with the scarf and hat, but he reassured her gently. "It will keep you warm. We need to stay safe." Once she was dressed, Henry suggested they explore the ranch a little. "I want you to see the animals," he said.
I.
"They're friendly. You don't have to be afraid." The girl's eyes widened. Animals? She hadn't spoken much the night before, but this idea seemed to intrigue her. She nodded slowly. Henry led her outside. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crisp, white, and sparkling under the morning sun. The air was still sharp, but the beauty of the ranch softened the harshness. Henry pointed out the cattle grazing in the distance. "Those are our cows. See them? They're calm, harmless. They'll come closer if you call them gently." The little girl crouched slightly behind Henry, her eyes wide as she watched the animals. After a few moments, she lifted a small hand and waved. One of the cows, curious, approached slowly. She giggled softly, the sound unfamiliar yet enchanting to Henry's ears. "They're nice," she said quietly. "Yes," Henry said, smiling. "Just like me. I promise they won't hurt you." They spent the morning walking the ranch, Henry explaining everything in gentle, careful words. He showed her the barn, the storage shed, and the windbreaks that kept the snow from piling too high around the property. She asked questions here and there, in a small, hesitant voice, and Henry answered patiently. He realized that even simple words of explanation, spoken slowly and kindly, helped her feel safe and less alone. By midday, they returned to the cabin. Henry cooked another simple meal, and the girl ate quietly, occasionally glancing up at him. Henry noticed the way she watched his hands as he worked, how she lingered near him when he chopped wood or fed the animals. She was learning the routines of life here, and in turn, he was learning how to care for someone else, how to be patient, how to anticipate needs, and how to offer comfort without expecting anything in return. After lunch, Henry suggested they sit by the fire. The child curled herself in a blanket again, and Henry took the seat opposite her. He began telling her stories about his family and the ranch. He spoke of his father, who had been a kind but strict man, of his grandfather, who had planted the tall pine trees, and even of his younger sister, who had moved to the city and lived far away. He spoke of the animals on the ranch, each one with a personality and a story. At first, she listened quietly, eyes wide, absorbing every word. Then, slowly, she began to respond. not with full sentences, just small comments, questions, and occasional laughter. Henry realized that this was the first time she had spoken freely since he found her. It was a small victory, but to him, it felt monumental.
Ah, you like it here? He asked softly, not wanting to scare her. Yes, warm, she whispered.
Her voice was still fragile, but there was a hint of trust now. Henry smiled, a warmth spreading in his chest. Good. You're safe here. I'll make sure nothing ever hurts you. The afternoon passed with small, gentle activities. They read books by the fire, played with a small wooden horse Henry had carved long ago, and watched the snow drift slowly past the window. Outside, the world was still harsh and cold, but inside, the cabin was filled with quiet joy and the first signs of a new family forming. As evening approached, Henry prepared a simple dinner. The girl helped him set the table in her small, shy way. She carried utensils carefully, placed them in neat rows, and even offered a small, shy smile. It was a rare moment of lightness in their otherwise difficult days, but Henry cherished it deeply. After dinner, he gave her a warm bath. She was hesitant at first, but he spoke to her gently, explaining every step. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a towel and smelling of soap and warmth, she looked up at him with a small, trusting smile. Henry realized then that this child, once alone and frightened, was beginning to feel safe and cared for. And he, in turn, was beginning to feel something he had long forgotten, the joy of nurturing another life. Before bed, Henry tucked her in, as he had the night before. He sat by her side for a few minutes, watching her eyelids grow heavy. "Sleep well," he whispered. "Tomorrow we'll do more. I promise you're safe now." She nodded slightly, curling closer into the blanket, a small smile on her lips. Henry left her room and looked out the window. The snow sparkled under the moonlight, quiet and still. For the first time in many years, he felt a deep sense of peace. The loneliness that had haunted him seemed to have lifted, replaced by something stronger. A bond, a responsibility, and a purpose. He knew that challenges lay ahead. Caring for a child, especially one who had been lost and frightened, would not be easy. But as he watched her sleep, he realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. He sank into his chair by the fire, thinking of the promise he had whispered the night before. "I'll be your father," he had said. And now he truly understood what it meant. It was not just a promise. It was a responsibility, a bond, and a commitment to love and protect someone completely. The child, small and fragile as she was, had awakened something in him that he had never felt before. As the night deepened, the cabin remained warm and safe, a small island of light in the cold, white world outside. And though Henry could not yet know what the future would hold, he knew one thing with certainty. He would not let this child face the world alone. He would guide her, protect her, and care for her with every part of his being. And in that quiet Montana cabin, a lonely rancher and a frightened little girl began to discover what it meant to be a family, one gentle day at a time. The days following the girl's arrival at the ranch were filled with quiet routines, new discoveries, and slowly growing trust. Henry McAllister, who had spent most of his life in solitude, began to feel the full weight and joy of caring for another human being. Every morning he woke early to tend the cattle, feed the chickens, and check the fences. But now there was someone waiting for him in the kitchen, a small, curious face watching him with wide eyes. The girl, whom he had started calling Ellie, was beginning to speak more, though her words were often simple and hesitant. She would ask him questions about the animals, the snow, and the stars. Henry answered patiently, using easy words and gentle tones. He realized quickly that she had been through hardship. She flinched at sudden noises, hesitated when strangers were mentioned, and clung to him in moments of fear. But she was also curious, brave in small ways, and eager to learn. Henry knew he had to be careful. A child who had been alone in the snow was fragile, not just physically, but emotionally. He needed to teach her trust slowly, one small step at a time. Some days were easy, like when she helped him feed the chickens or when she laughed while watching a calf stumble across the frozen pasture. Other days were harder. She would wake in the night crying, sometimes calling out for someone she had lost, and Henry would sit by her bed holding her tiny hand until her sobs quieted. Each time he whispered, "I'm here. You're safe now. I won't leave you." One afternoon, Henry decided to take Ellie on a walk to a small frozen pond behind the barn. The snow was deep and the cold was sharp, but the sun made the ice sparkle like glass. "Do you want to see something fun?" Henry asked, smiling. Ellie nodded, excitement flickering in her dark eyes. He led her carefully across the snow, explaining each step so she wouldn't slip. "Hold my hand," he said. "We'll go slowly." When they reached the pond, Henry knelt down and brushed the snow from the surface, revealing smooth, clear ice. He showed her how to walk carefully, how to slide just a little, and how to laugh when she lost balance. Ellie giggled, a sound that warmed Henry's heart more than any fire could. She laughed freely, forgetting for a moment the fear and loneliness that had haunted her for so long. But life on the ranch wasn't always easy. Henry had to work long hours, and some days the weather made even small tasks difficult. The snowdrifts could trap the cattle, the fences needed constant repair, and food had to be managed carefully. For a man used to solitude, it was challenging enough. But now he had a child depending on him. He had to think not only of his own survival, but of hers as well. Some nights he would sit by the fire, exhausted, and worry about whether he was doing enough to keep her safe and healthy. Ellie, sensing his concern, would sometimes approach him quietly and place a small hand on his arm. She didn't have the words yet, but her presence alone was enough to remind him why he was doing this. Henry realized that caring for her wasn't just about providing food and shelter. It was about creating a sense of home, trust, and security. It was teaching her that the world could be kind, even when it had once been cruel. One evening, as snow began to fall again, a knock came at the cabin door. Henry opened it to find a neighbor, a kindly woman named Martha, carrying a basket of supplies. "Henry," she said softly, "I heard about the little girl. Are you sure you can manage? Social services might want to know more about her situation." Henry nodded, trying to keep his tone firm but calm. "I can manage. She's safe here." "I'll take care of her." Martha looked at him with concern. "You've never raised a child before." "It's a lot of responsibility." "I know," Henry admitted. "But I won't let her down. I promise." Martha nodded slowly. "All right. Just remember, there will be questions, but you're doing the right thing." She left the basket at the door and smiled gently before walking back through the snow. Henry closed the door and looked down at Ellie, who had watched the exchange quietly. "You see," he said softly, "people will ask questions. Tell us. They want to make sure you're safe, but I promise I won't let anyone hurt you. You're mine now, Ellie." Ellie looked up at him, a small smile appearing on her face. It was tentative, but it was there. For Henry, that smile was worth more than any words could express. The days passed in a rhythm of learning and growing together. Henry taught Ellie how to care for the animals, how to carry firewood without slipping, and even how to identify tracks in the snow. Ellie, in turn, taught Henry patience, imagination, and the joy of small moments. She would laugh at his clumsy attempts to teach her how to milk a cow or how to tie knots in the ropes for the animals. Her laughter filled the cabin, chasing away the silence that had once dominated his life. One particularly cold night, a blizzard hit the ranch. The wind roared outside, and snow piled against the cabin walls. Henry made sure the fire was strong and that the windows were secure. He brought Ellie close, wrapping her in blankets and holding her as they listened to the storm. She trembled slightly, but she did not cry. Instead, she clung to him tightly, and Henry realized that this trust, built over just a few days, had grown stronger than he could have imagined. During the storm, he told her stories about the stars, about animals, and about the history of the ranch. His voice was calm and steady, a steady anchor in the howling wind. Ellie began to relax, even asking questions and sharing small observations. Henry smiled, knowing that these were the moments that would stay with her forever, the moments that would teach her that the world could be safe, warm, and full of love. As the blizzard subsided and the snow settled, Henry and Ellie ventured outside cautiously. The ranch was covered in a thick layer of white, the trees bowed under the weight of snow, and the pond had frozen solid again. They trudged through the deep snow, leaving tiny footprints behind. Henry watched Ellie's eyes sparkle with wonder, her small face flushed from the cold. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, beautiful," she whispered. Despite the hardships, Henry felt a sense of pride. He had faced storms, harsh winters, and long days alone. But now, with Ellie by his side, life felt fuller. He was teaching her, but she was teaching him as well, about joy, trust, and the unexpected ways love could enter one's life. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the local authorities. Henry opened it carefully, knowing that it would likely contain questions about Ellie's situation. The letter asked for information about her well-being, her living conditions, and his ability to care for her. Henry read it quietly, then looked down at Ellie, who was building a small snow figure outside the cabin. He smiled and nodded. He would answer honestly, explaining the care, warmth, and love he provided. And he knew deep in his heart that no paper, official or not, could define the bond he and Ellie had formed. That evening, Henry sat by the fire with Ellie, telling her about the letter in simple words. "Some people want to make sure you're safe," he explained. "But don't worry, I will always keep you safe. You're my family now." Ellie looked up at him, eyes wide and trusting. "Family," she whispered. "Yes," Henry said softly, placing a hand on her small shoulder. "Family, you and me, together." For Henry, that word carried more meaning than he could ever have imagined. He had spent years alone, content with routines and work, but never knowing the deep, quiet happiness that came from raising a child, from being needed and loved in return. And for Ellie, it was a word she had never truly known. But now, with him, it began to make sense. She had a protector, a guide, and someone who would never abandon her. As the night grew late, Henry tucked Ellie into bed, holding her hand until her eyes closed. He sat by her side, reflecting on the past weeks. Life had changed drastically, in ways he could never have predicted. The challenges were many, but the rewards, her laughter, her trust, her growing courage, were immeasurable. Outside, the snow lay quiet and untouched. Inside, a man and a child had built the first layers of trust and love that would carry them through the long winters ahead. Henry knew that the path would not always be easy, that questions, fears, and challenges would continue to arise. But as he watched Ellie sleep peacefully, he knew that together they could face anything. For the first time in his life, Henry McAllister felt the true meaning of responsibility, connection, and family. And he knew, with quiet certainty, that this little girl had changed him forever. Winter had held the ranch in its icy grip for weeks, and the cold seemed unending. Snow had drifted high against the fences, and the wind swept across the open fields with a relentless fury. Henry McAllister had grown used to the harsh weather, but caring for Ellie had added an entirely new dimension to the struggle. He had to think not just about survival, but about keeping her safe, warm, and healthy. Every morning he checked the animals, the firewood supply, and the cabin's insulation, all while keeping a careful eye on Ellie. One morning the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Henry had just finished feeding the chickens when he noticed Ellie standing at the window, watching the falling snow. Her small hands were pressed against the cold glass, her cheeks red from the chill. Henry walked over and knelt beside her. "The snow is deep today," he said gently. "We have to be careful if we go outside." Ellie nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity and a little apprehension. "Can we play?" she asked softly. Henry smiled. "Of course, but we'll stay close. It's dangerous out there with so much snow." They bundled up carefully, Henry making sure her hat, scarf, and gloves were secure. Once outside, the snow crunched under their boots. The world was quiet except for the soft whistle of the wind, and the ranch looked like a winter wonderland, bright and sparkling under the pale sun. Henry held Ellie's hand tightly as they walked toward the small barn, the animals moving slowly in the deep snow. Ellie's face lit up when she saw the cows and horses. She reached out to touch one of the gentle horses, and it nuzzled her hand. Henry watched her closely, proud of her bravery but alert for any signs of danger. He had always respected animals, but now he also had a new reason for vigilance. As the day wore on, the wind grew stronger. Snow began to pile quickly, drifting in large waves across the fields. Henry realized that the storm was intensifying faster than he had expected. "Ellie," he called, "we need to head back to the cabin before it gets worse." But as they turned to leave, Henry noticed something troubling. A small calf had wandered away from the herd, struggling to find footing in the snow. Its tiny legs sank into the drifts, and it let out a soft, frightened bleat. Henry's heart pounded. He knew the calf could not survive long in these conditions without help. "Stay here," Henry told Ellie, positioning himself between her and the calf. "I'll be right back." He rushed across the snow, slipping and struggling to reach the calf. The wind tore at his coat, and the cold burned his fingers, but he pressed on. Reaching the frightened animal, he lifted it gently and carried it back toward the barn. By the time he returned to Ellie, his face was red from the cold and exertion, but she was safe and smiling nervously. "You saved it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and relief. Henry nodded, setting the calf down inside the barn. "We have to help all of them, Ellie. That's what families do. They take care of each other, no matter what." Ellie's eyes widened. "Family?" she whispered. "Yes," Henry said softly. "Family means we watch over each other, protect each other, and stay together. I'll always keep you safe, Ellie." The storm continued to rage through the night. Henry secured the cabin as best he could, piling extra blankets around the windows and doors. He made a fire in the fireplace and prepared a simple meal, but it was difficult to cook while keeping an eye on the growing wind and drifting snow. Ellie sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets, watching him. She seemed both fascinated and worried by the power of nature outside, and Henry knew he had to calm her fears. "Listen to me, Ellie," he said, sitting beside her. The storm is strong, but we are stronger. We have each other, and we have our home. Nothing will hurt us here." Ellie nodded slowly, leaning against him. For a moment the world outside seemed less frightening, the storm less dangerous. Henry realized that his words were not just comforting her, they were comforting him too. He had spent so many years alone, facing challenges by himself, but now he understood that courage and strength could grow when shared with someone you loved. By late evening, the snow had piled high against the cabin, and the world outside was nearly invisible. Henry and Ellie sat together telling stories to pass the time. He told her about the animals on the ranch, about the history of the land, and about the people who had lived there before him. Ellie listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that made him smile. Her curiosity and bravery were remarkable for a child who had faced such hardship. As the night deepened, a sudden noise startled them. The wind had blown a piece of the fence against the side of the barn, causing a loud bang. Ellie shrieked and clung to Henry, and he held her close. "It's all right," he whispered. "It's just the wind. Nothing can hurt us here. I'm right here with you." She buried her face in his coat, trembling slightly, but he continued to speak softly until her breathing slowed and her body relaxed. Henry realized that these small moments of fear, courage, and trust, were shaping their bond. He was not just her protector. He was becoming her father, in every sense of the word. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch blanketed in snow. The sun shone brightly, reflecting off the drifts and making the world appear magical. Henry and Ellie ventured outside carefully, inspecting the animals and checking for damage. Some fences had been bent, and a few small branches had fallen, but nothing was broken beyond repair. Henry felt a sense of relief. They had survived together, stronger and closer than ever. During the day, Henry taught Ellie how to navigate the snow safely, how to recognize the tracks of animals, and how to be careful with slippery ice. She was attentive and eager to learn, and Henry marveled at her resilience. Despite the storm, despite the challenges of living in such a harsh environment, she was beginning to thrive. And Henry, in turn, discovered a joy he had never known, the joy of sharing life with someone who relied on him, trusted him, and inspired him every day. In the evenings, Henry and Ellie continued their new routines. They cooked simple meals together, played small games, and told stories by the fire. He noticed that she laughed more, spoke more, and even began to ask for small things like helping with chores or reading a favorite story again. Each moment was a step forward, a sign that the bond between them was deepening. One night, as they sat by the fire, Henry reflected on how far they had come. Ellie had been frightened, cold, and alone when he found her, but now she was warm, safe, and beginning to smile again. He realized that love, patience, and care could heal even the deepest wounds. He promised himself that he would continue to protect her, teach her, and provide a home filled with warmth and trust. Ellie, sensing the peace around her, leaned against Henry and whispered softly, "I'm glad you found me." Henry smiled, feeling a swell of emotion he could hardly put into words. "I'm glad too, Ellie. We were meant to find each other. We're family now." As they watched the stars through the frost-covered window, the ranch felt alive with possibility. The storm had tested them, but it had also brought them closer together. Henry knew that challenges would continue to come, but he also knew that together they could face anything. That night, Henry held Ellie close, listening to her slow, even breathing. Outside, the world was cold and vast, but inside the cabin there was warmth, love, and the beginning of a family forged not by chance alone, but by courage, trust, and heart. Spring was slowly arriving at the ranch. The snow had begun to melt, leaving patches of brown earth and early green shoots poking through. Henry McAllister noticed the change with a sense of quiet relief. The long, harsh winter had tested both him and Ellie in ways neither of them could have anticipated. But now, with the world thawing, it felt as though life itself was opening a new chapter for them. The ranch, once cold and silent, now buzzed with small signs of life, birds returning, calves exploring the fields, and the gentle hum of running water as the ice melted. Ellie stood at the window, her small hands pressed against the glass as she watched the sun rise over the hills. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of true hope. The cabin, once quiet and lonely, now felt like home. She could hear the animals moving outside and smell the fresh spring air. More importantly, she could feel the warmth of Henry's presence nearby, steady, protective, and comforting. Henry noticed her standing there and walked over, kneeling beside her. "The snow is finally leaving us," he said, smiling. "Soon we'll have the whole ranch open for exploring." Ellie turned to him, her dark eyes full of trust. "Can we see the flowers?" she asked shyly. Henry laughed softly. "Of course. We'll go slowly, but I want you to see everything the land has to offer." That day, they spent hours walking the ranch together. Henry showed Ellie the first wildflowers peeking through the thawed ground, the small streams forming from melted snow, and the way the animals explored the softened fields. Ellie was fascinated, pointing to each new discovery with delight. She asked questions, laughed freely, and even sang small songs she had made up along the way. Henry followed her lead, letting her curiosity guide their day, and in turn he felt a deep joy he had never known in his years of solitude. As the days turned into weeks, Henry began the process of making Ellie's place in the world official. Letters to social services had already been written, explaining how he had found her, cared for her, and provided a safe and loving home. A representative from the local office visited the ranch to meet them, asking questions about Ellie's well-being, her routine, and Henry's ability to continue caring for her. Ellie sat quietly beside Henry during the visit, clutching a small blanket for comfort. The social worker smiled at her, asking gentle questions about her life at the ranch. To Henry's relief, Ellie answered softly, speaking of the animals, the games she played, and how safe she felt with him. The representative could see the bond they shared, and after careful consideration, she confirmed that Henry could legally become her guardian. The relief and joy Henry felt were overwhelming. For so long, he had been alone, managing the ranch and living a solitary life. Now he had the opportunity to officially call Ellie his daughter. But even more importantly, he realized that the bond they had formed through shared hardship, trust, and love was stronger than any legal paperwork. That evening, Henry and Ellie sat by the fire celebrating quietly. Ellie had drawn a small picture of the ranch, of Henry, and of herself. "This is us," she said, showing him the drawing proudly. Henry looked at it and felt a lump in his throat. It was simple, but it captured everything that mattered: love, safety, and belonging. Over the next few months, life settled into a new rhythm. Henry continued his work on the ranch, but now Ellie was an active part of it. She helped feed the animals, carried firewood, and learned how to care for the smaller tasks around the property. She was eager to help, and Henry was patient, teaching her slowly and carefully. Sometimes mistakes happened: a spilled bucket of water, a dropped bag of feed, but Henry laughed with her, guiding her gently and turning each moment into a learning opportunity. One sunny afternoon, Henry and Ellie planted a small garden together. Ellie dug carefully, her small hands covered in soil, while Henry showed her how to space the seeds and water them properly. She asked countless questions, fascinated by every detail. Henry answered each one with patience and encouragement. By the time they were finished, both were muddy and tired, but their hearts were full. The garden was more than a patch of earth. It was a symbol of growth, care, and the life they were building together. Evenings were filled with stories by the fire, games, and laughter. Ellie had grown more confident, speaking in full sentences, asking questions, and expressing her thoughts and feelings. She had begun to sleep through the night, no longer haunted by the fears that had once gripped her. Henry, too, had changed. He had discovered a deep capacity for love, patience, and joy he had never known. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a place of warmth, safety, and family. One day, Henry took Ellie to the small pond behind the barn. The ice had melted, and the water shimmered under the sun. Ellie dipped her hands into the cool water, laughing at the sensation. "It's so pretty," she exclaimed. Henry smiled, watching her delight. "Yes," he said softly, "and just like this pond, your life is full of possibilities now. We have each other, and together, we can face anything." Ellie looked up at him, eyes shining. "I'm happy, Henry," she whispered. "I love you." Henry felt a warmth in his chest that words could not describe. "I love you too, Ellie," he said, pulling her close. "And I promise I always will. You're my daughter now, and nothing will ever change that." As spring turned into early summer, the ranch thrived. The animals grew healthier, the fields became green and vibrant, and the cabin itself seemed brighter and more welcoming. Neighbors stopped by more often, bringing small gifts or sharing news. They marveled at the bond between Henry and Ellie, seeing how love, patience, and dedication could heal even the deepest wounds. Ellie's laughter filled the ranch from dawn to dusk. She chased chickens, helped gather eggs, and even learned to ride a small pony Henry had trained. She sang songs she had made up, told stories about her dreams, and asked questions about everything she saw. Henry listened, guided and encouraged, taking pride in every small step of her growth. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Henry and Ellie sat on the porch, watching the world around them. The air was warm, the animals quiet, and the ranch peaceful. Ellie leaned against him, tired but happy from a day full of adventure. "Henry," she said softly, "I'm glad I found you." Henry smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "I'm glad I found you too, Ellie. You've changed my life, and I promise to keep you safe and happy always." As the stars appeared in the sky, Henry realized how far they had come. From the cold, lonely winter when he had found a frightened child beside a frozen wagon, to this moment of warmth, trust, and family, their journey had been long and challenging, but it had been worth every moment. Ellie had healed, grown, and found a home. Henry had discovered a love and purpose he had never imagined. Together, they had faced storms, isolation, and fear, and had emerged stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now rang with laughter, life, and love. The animals thrived, the land blossomed, and the bond between father and daughter grew deeper each day. Henry knew that challenges would still come, harsh winters, storms, and the daily work of the ranch. But with Ellie by his side, he felt ready for anything. As they sat together, watching the firelight flicker in the cabin, Henry whispered softly, "We made it, Ellie. Together." Ellie smiled, leaning her head against him. "Together," she repeated. And in that quiet Montana cabin, surrounded by the warmth of family, the bond they had forged through hardship, trust, and love shone brighter than any storm, any cold, or any shadow of the past. Henry and Ellie were no longer just a man and a lost child. They were a family, whole, complete, and filled with hope for all the days ahead. The future was uncertain, as life always is, but Henry no longer feared it. He had found something far greater than solitude or routine. He had found a daughter, a purpose, and a love that could weather any storm. And Ellie had found a father, a home, and the certainty that she was safe, cherished, and loved beyond measure. The sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying the promise of new beginnings. And inside the cabin, a man and a child sat together, hearts full, ready to face the future hand in hand, knowing that no matter what came, they would never be alone again.